Hey guys, it's BlockchainBrad, and as always, it's freaking awesome to be with you in the blockchain and crypto space. Guys, today we're going to be talking about three main things in this talk. It's going to be about Onchain, a VC-backed company owned by DAR and backed by a corporation named Fosun. We're going to be talking about the Ontology Trust Network. So that's an overall mapping and connective system. And we're going to talk about how that relates to the third point, which is the NEO ecosystem, comprised of three key parts: asset, identity, and contracts. So guys, that's the three foci for the talk. But the main premise is to talk about how the Ontology Trust Network facilitates NEO, how it helps NEO, how it supports NEO, and also to unpack exactly what the Ontology Trust Network is. So guys, sit back, grab a beer, grab a coffee, and let's get stuck into this. Guys, the first thing I want to talk about is the Ontology Network Twitter site. If you haven't been there, it's a great source of information. It's updated regularly, and many people who aren't familiar with Twitter, one of the value points of this particular platform is that it is so expedient in the information and news. I'm on there at least 2 or 3 hours every day trying to provide key information about NEO and the overall architecture, the system, anything that interrelates to NEO, hence I'm doing this talk as well. And then I try and also provide information via YouTube. So both platforms are in use, and if you haven't been across to my Twitter, mine is Brad_Laurie, and it'll be in the links below. So guys, this is a great one, and if you're not familiar with one of the posts here, it's a Medium post about a launch that's happening in New York, and that's a very important one happening today. Later on, I suspect, based on the release of the video, and it's comprised of some very important players within the overall network that NEO is part of, and we're talking about things like the CEO of Onchain, we're talking about the lead architect, we're talking about several different stakeholders who are going to be attending. So it's worth knowing about, and if you haven't, check out that site, it'll be all provided for you. The next thing I want to talk to you about briefly is Malcolm Lorida did a fantastic write-up recently in Medium. And the reason why he did this was because very recently on this subreddit, the Neo Reddit site, a lot of people were very concerned. They very clearly vocalized, or they wrote up their responses to specific questions that were released by the Ontology Network. And they released, it was responses to specific answers that the Ontology Network released a few days ago. And as a result, Malcolm Lorida has come out and tried to redress some of the concerns, address the issues, so that people are much more aware of exactly how Ontology Network benefits NEO. So what I've done is I've tried to utilize some of that information and presented a PowerPoint presentation to, I guess, unpack essentially what Ontology is and how it does, in fact, benefit the ecosystem. The next thing is just a reference point for your own reassurance, is that on the Ontology Network there are people who are involved in trying to submit information, data, viewpoints. And whenever things are retreated by an internal core, you know that there's a degree of credibility. And in this case, I wanted to let you know that they are starting to retweet some of my content, which is fantastic, because it means that you're potentially getting really good quality information that directly relates to what Ontology Network stands for. So it is my opinion, it is my view, it is my research, but I just wanted to make sure that you're aware that I'm not just trying to make up stuff, and in fact some of it's backed by Ontology Network themselves. So let's get stuck into the presentation. Let's start from the beginning and look at the facts. So here you have basically, you have NEO recognized as a smart economy. So what is a smart economy? Well, essentially, it's one in which it enfranchises a global system, a global ecosystem premised on one fundamental concept, and that is an asset. So essentially, that's what NEO's focus is. It's focused on trying to create some sort of robust mechanism to uplift the NEO as an asset and provide that as a means for transaction, value, and interconnection with business across the globe. NEO also, in that sense, requires some degree of regulation and some sort of automation, and this is where Ontology Network comes in. What the Ontology Network is a overarching framework. It is a network of essentially distributed data identity and verification services. So and it collectivizes it. It connects all the dots. It's essentially the web of distributed data and identity. So that's a very different concept as opposed to what NEO is. NEO is a blockchain that is premised on the concept of an asset being a modality for business. So Ontology Network is actually in direct support. So it's a conduit for making that happen. And as I'm going to unpack this with you, you'll see that Ontology Network actually does so much to support NEO as that asset core. So let's move on from that. Onchain, let's talk about that. Onchain was born to serve the business-to-business gateway to NEO Smart Economy. So as I said before, you have the NEO Smart Economy premised, its premise is about the asset. Then you have the ontology fabric, the interweaving, the interconnected, the robust, it's more than a service provision, it's actually the overall architecture for services. It is there providing trust, and I'm going to talk about exactly why trust is so important. But then you have this thing that many people don't know about called Onchain. And what Onchain is, it's a private VC-backed system underpinned by a protocol called DNA. It is also an enterprise, it's a company. And Onchain is very important because it is designed to essentially foster the privatization of blockchain business via this DNA protocol, whereby they are going to onsell, and they are onselling this for businesses currently in China, but it's designed to go much farther than that, so that private enterprise can utilize this protocol and build their own independent closed blockchains. So when you think of private, think closed. When you think of centralization, that's a reasonable supposition, because they are controlled within their own, and that's predominantly how centralized models work today. So if we look at companies like, for example, Google, or if we look at companies like YouTube or Facebook, there are degrees of centralization because there's mechanisms in place whereby there are core teams that that run the entire business. Well, that's exactly the premise here. But it doesn't just stop there, and this is what is very fundamentally important about the tripartite connection of Onchain, Ontology Trust Network, and NEO. And we're going to talk about that, but essentially the crux is the interconnection is NEOX. It is a very important cross-operable bridge that bridges NEO and Onchain together. More importantly, Ontology as a trust system affords the trust that many businesses, if not most businesses of the world, absolutely require to be fully functional on an open source blockchain, on an open source public blockchain like NEO. Up until now, the majority of significant corporations, major business, big business, they were reticent to even go there, whether it be NEO or any other open source public decentralized model, because there wasn't a mechanism in place for their data and verifications to be managed, so that it wasn't bringing it back into their own business structures. It was just going to be distributed out into the ecosystems. So this is why Ontology is so fundamentally important, because when you understand the interconnections, you see that it's actually building NEO as an asset. It's allowing much more business to enter in and adopt NEO as a primary asset marker for business. So NEO can connect to the NEO Smart Economy using this cross-chain protocol. And I've made a graphic for you so that you could sort of get the concept. It's essentially that gateway. It's that entrance point, or that means of which you can enter into another realm of private enterprise. And there would be no way to access that if it wasn't for NEOX. So it's a very important component. And to back that, if you go into the NEO white paper, you'll actually see a huge lot of information about exactly what NEOX is, and it's divided into two parts, into a distributed component and a asset component. So again, those two key words for this ecosystem are distribution, being the ontology component, and the asset being NEO. If you want to know more, you can read up on exactly what the plans are, but it's going to become much more clear as the NEOX is released. It hasn't been released yet, but certainly we can see that, and there are already clear allusions and clear statements made by Da Hongfei and Malcolm Larida about NEOX and how it's so beneficial to the worlds of on-chain bridging across to NEO. So it's very exciting, and it's cutting edge because very few blockchains are doing this kind of thing. The next thing I want to talk to you about is Ontology being specifically designed to bring ownership of data back to the people. And that's really important because it allows you, because Ontology is a trust network that houses all kinds of industries, and inside industries it houses all kinds of protocols, it houses all kinds of blockchains. Because it's a robust and overarching framework, what it means is that people who want to access data, they can do that by utilizing this system. And for example, if we focus on NEO, NEO has one of the key components called NEO digital identity. And that's extremely important when you look at it from the context of the trust system, because it means that you can access and utilize that data whenever you need to, and it gives you full control. And whilst in an ideal world, we want to circumvent, systems, if we want to make money out of a token for business, then the only way for that to become of immense value is for it to have some kind of trust network juxtaposed to its value. So that's what Ontology does. So if you are a NEO hodler, hopefully you can see the absolute value of this trust system working in direct correlation with NEO. Remember also that one of the key partners of Ontology Network is actually NEO, and they would never sign up for something like that unless there wasn't a direct, mutually exclusive, mutually beneficial corollary between them or connection. And there are so many of them, and we're going to unpack that when we understand more and more. So Ontology brings its value, brings the control of data back to the people. And what's important in terms of payment rails, what's stated by Malcolm Lorida is that Ontology it's going to work through a third-party system whereby it can fetch it through Ontology to exchange it securely on digital marketplaces. So transfer of identity will use NEO as a payment rail, and that payment rail is actually gas. So if you're wondering how gas relates to the Ontology system, it really does, because gas is utilized as a mechanism for payment, and it certainly can happen on the Ontology network. The other thing to note also is that Ontology has its own token system. It is divided into governance and into utility, just like NEO. So the Ont represents the governance and the ONG represents the utility. And so from a fundamental standpoint, when you understand gas, the ONG utility will fuel the entire distributed data and identity system. It will not fuel an asset premise. In fact, what actually will happen is, because they both can run dApps, they can run decentralized digital applications, the ON system will actually support the NEO contract, because it will directly support the asset value of NEO, and thereby support the NEO contract in its own mechanisms. So that's really cool. The next thing to talk about is some of the key questions that came from the AMA on the Reddit. So let's get stuck into those. How would the reputation system for tackling misinformation work on the blockchain? Well, the response here was that the reputation system is just one method of evaluation. We need multiple standards to create a complete system of addressing the problem of misinformation. So Ontology will in the future have different rating systems using different information to evaluate different entities. So I just want to speak of that for a moment, because that is exactly where the key interrelates to the Ontology Trust Network. The key, which is its own company, its own system, it comes from Singapore in its original design. It's extremely comprehensive and it's extremely robust, and it's worth looking into. But what is highly valuable is that it's a very systematized, identity-based company that's housed inside the Ontology network, so that it becomes a key identity storage system, a key marker, a means in which identity can be managed, can be executed, can be located, can be transacted, etc. So that's a key feature that's inside the Ontology network. But what goes one step further, in that when we are talking about reputation and we're talking about the capacity for Ontology to effect and reflect measures for us to have our identity recognized through the blockchain, when we understand the scope and scale of the need for trust, identity measures are really important. They allow us to ascertain our stake in any particular cryptocurrency or any particular blockchain investments, and it always will filter back. But the fact that we have control in this open source decentralized model is what is revolutionary, because typically, if you look across at companies like Microsoft with their Cocoa protocols, if you look at Hyperledger with their Fabric protocols, they are designed to be closed. And whilst Onchain are directly linked to both of those companies, which is massively important when you understand that Onchain is linked to NEO through NEOX. The beauty of Ontology is that it's public. It's a public blockchain that's working in direct support with with NEO and in direct correlation. So there's an alignment between these two public blockchain systems. So what are the exact functions of the Ontology tokens? So is Ont a utility token, or is it an asset that produces the reward? Well, here's the answer. Essentially, because business scenarios on Ontology are expandable, meaning that because it's this overarching network, it's not just NEO that's going to utilize this network either, but NEO has a direct and very powerful connection with Ontology. Remember the interconnections that underpin it, the business agreements? That's why. But what's even more powerful is it has an incredible, what we call, pluggability feature. And that means that regardless of whether it be old tech in this industry or new tech, being blockchain tech, all kinds of businesses can actually plug into and utilize the on-chain network system. And that is significant given this direct correlation, this direct conduit of agreements between the Ontology Trust Network and NEO. Because fundamentally, again, is that both uplift the value of NEO being an asset. And when given that there's so much pluggability capacity and potential for the Ontology network to support NEO, that is significant as well. So in relation to this, what's stated here is that there will be both a governance and a utility token. The governance token will be used in Ontology governance decision making, and the gas will be used for service fees. So that's exactly how it works, in that just like gas, the service fee will be the ONG, and it will work to actually support the distribution of data and identity and verification. So that's really cool. More will come to light as we know more about this token system. Can you give a practical application of Ontology? There are so many. Because it houses families within the system, because it houses specific industries, and there's a multitude of those. You can go and check out the information that's posted on the ont.io website. What essentially it affords is for all kinds of industry, all kinds of government entities as well, to be able to, again, interact with this system so that they can access data, they can access identification information whenever they need it. And also, more importantly, what Ontology does very well is it allows for a network whereby the information can be passed across industry, cross-chain, cross-platform, cross-DApp. So it's a very vibrant, very robust, very enlivened, or very live sort of system, in that it's constantly moving once it gets going. The next thing to talk about is, will Ontology have its own complex chain, or will it fork from NEO? Well, firstly, no, it won't be forking because it's a separate entity. Ontology is its own structure, its own system, separate to NEO, but they are underpinned by a philosophy, a practice, and an intention that is an overall architecture. And that's important because all of these three are interrelated: on-chain, Ontology system, and NEO. So Ontology has its own public core ledger. It's not forked, and it acts as a connector or mapping system for identity, data, and other information. That's predominantly about distributed information. So Ontology and NEO, let's talk that. So there are three really important reasons why NEO and Ontology are distinct. So I'm going to talk about them. The first one is that, essentially, as I was saying before, businesses require trust. And so there's a reason why this is known as the Ontology Trust Network. It's because it provides for, essentially, if we want to talk really simply, it gives the big tick for big business, for consortiums, for banks. For government even, and there's a reason why I mentioned government again, because on-chain is directly linked with government. But they give it the big tick because it provides for that assurance of containment, that assurance of protection, that assurance of governance of key aspects of identity and data. Okay, so, and the other thing also is they make the point that it's too much of a leap of faith to simply just throw essentially what is money at a business that is fundamentally designed to circumvent. So we know from first-hand experience from the generation 1 and 2 blockchains, particularly generation 1, they were premised on complete circumvention of the systems, complete circumvention of modalities, centralized systems that actually had degrees of trust. And what we've learned from it as we move across to what is now the generation 3, which is NEO is part of, is that there's an absolute requirement for consultation, for integration, and for applications with trust. And this is the first time we've seen at this kind of scale a public blockchain system, so not a blockchain but a system, address this for all blockchains of the future who want to utilize trust. And it's the only one currently that's been released so far that it does this in the public domain. The others, other products, as I mentioned before, Fabric, Corda, and Coco, they do that in a very closed public sense, but they use things like the virtual machines of Ethereum, which is Microsoft is doing, to try and access the public blockchain that way. NEO is different in that it has its own virtual machine, has its own public system, and it has the capacity to work directly with NEO as the asset, so it's very exciting. The second reason is that identity services generally require high throughput and low latency. So that's a very big boon for the Ontology network and for NEO, because it offers very significant changes, because it can operate with a very sophisticated engine called the Onchain engine, and it essentially allows for matching, works on a very large scale in terms of scalability. So we're talking high scalability for the first time in the public domain, far higher than we've seen in the past. It's not economical and scalable to use NEO on its own for the reasons we mentioned before, because essentially it distributes and it disperses all the data out. What Ontology will do is contain and govern and maintain specific aspects of the system, so that it allows for much more scalability, much more focused on NEO being the asset in the open market of business. The last point to mention here, and this is the third point, is that applications can choose to run business logic smart contracts on Ontology or NEO. So they're interoperable, the options there, and that's massively important, because the premise for smart contracts on these two are very different. From a systematic point of view, the premise for a dApp on Ontology is one of distributed trust and identity, specifically for that reason. And likewise, the specific reason for one on NEO is business. It's for its asset value. And so because there's an interoperability and for this capacity to cross-platform the dApps, that's another boon for the system. But it's also great because we can distinguish between the purposes of the two dApps, which is, it's great, really great. The next point I want to talk about is, can you explain how NEO contracts will be used in Ontology? And this is important because NEO contracts are essential for the growth of NEO, and as you know, there's already quite a few, and I'm going to show you some. There's quite a few that have come out this week, and they are significant operations at significant companies. But NEO focuses on digital asset services with smart contracts, including token usage linked to business scenarios. Ontology is actually, it can link between NEO and non-token based business scenarios. For example, if the bank needs digital asset services, Ontology can be the connective. It can be the conduit of service provision between NEO as the asset and the bank. And that's really important because obviously there's an investment potential for Ontology, but because it can act as the conduit between the bank service and NEO, NEO itself is going to benefit, because the more robust the system becomes, the more valuable NEO becomes, which is really cool. So will the Ontology tokens be built on top of the NEO blockchain? And that is not going to be happening. And will the NEO or gas token in any way be used for interacting with Ontology? So here's the answer. The Ontology token sale distribution will accept NEO. So NEO, you can buy the ONG and ONT tokens with NEO, and that's a cool thing because it again shows that direct connection. However, Ontology token mechanisms has not been yet confirmed. So how they're all going to release that system we don't yet know. But NEO and gas definitely can be used on the Ontology network for different business scenarios. And again, when we're talking about asset, that's one of those key business scenarios. So it's not a case of that they're all completely distinct in terms of application and use and benefit and allowance for NEO to function, because NEO can function in direct concert with Ontology. What's the difference between digital identity and trust identity? Ontology's trust identity is essentially the map. It is the map of trust for a potentially infinite number of blockchains, protocols, and industries. It's a framework for trust. It's not a specific blockchain. Digital identity is different in that it is about NEO's ID. It's specific to the implications for NEO to protect its asset via some sort of identification process, and that's where it can utilize the trust system that Ontology offers. Does Ontology have an exclusive contract with NEO? This is a good question. Regulating the partnership and responsibilities. Is there a roadmap of what Ontology and NEO aim to accomplish through their partnership? So NEO will be the primary digital asset service provider for clearing and settlement on Ontology. So that's massive. So I'll say that again. NEO is the primary asset for clearing and settlement on Ontology. So that shows you a direct and specific link, and it shows you a direct means in which NEO is going to work in Ontology and have a direct function and purpose. There is no contract currently between Ontology and NEO, so there's no written contract stating these interconnections. But remember, the whole framework is designed in these three parts of Onchain, Ontology and NEO to co-support each other. One thing on the roadmap that is definitely happening is that that in the future, business scenarios on Ontology will want to hold ICOs, and they will be able to, and they'll be able to on NEO as well. So that's important. Again, looking at that cross-platform capacity that is very well promoted in the Ontology network website. Can we expect Next, Ontology, and the project ICO to work together? Yes, it's possible technically, and it could happen in the future. Can you provide one case where NEO, Gas, Ontology DNA, the key, the NEO ID interact together? So here's an example of that. Given that there's a need to be a strong vertical integration between them to justify the Ontology architecture. So the NEO ID and the key can be ID service providers on Ontology. So again, it's about service providers. Inside as a layer, as an inner workings, we have the key, as I mentioned before, as a service provider on Ontology. Likewise, NEO ID is again functioning as a service provider in the system. And that's going to become much more predominant for all kinds of businesses because they're going to become service providers inside the network, and that's where all the interconnection happens, because the interconnection that Ontology does is interconnect all of them together so that essentially we can utilize our assets in a better way. And NEO and Gas can be used for clearing and settlement scenarios. In some cases, ID verification will be a requirement for execution of smart contracts. DNA, however, is just a framework and it's not a platform. So that's important. It's actually more than that though. DNA is a protocol. It's not, as well as being a framework. And now that framework is designed for the private sector, and it's designed for the on-cell. That Onchain wants to build out blockchain construction, build out private enterprise, on the blockchain, and they're going to use the DNA framework and protocol to do that. So again, that's in the private sector. Ontology and other services. How does Ontology relate to the key? Are they direct in competition? No, they are not. Ontology is a connector mapping system that interlinks identity services. The key is one of those key services, and it's a very, very important one. That's why it's been released early. So in that sense, they are mutually exclusive and co-supportive, and in no way are they in competition with each other. But it is a good question a lot of people are worried about. So does Ontology have plans to have an API compatible layer, Web3 integration? And the answer is Ontology will provide multiple protocols, API interfaces, including Web3 in the future.